The darkness comes, an eternal darkness-based fic. Chapter 4, A Clue in the Darkness. Alexandra Roivas sighed as she led the way to the living area in Enga. Normally, showing new arrivals the living area wasn't a reason for her to sigh. This time, however, she was going to get the Kales, and she had a feeling it would be an inconvenience. She had seen Yvette pull Richard out of the building where the newly discovered teleportation structure was, and she was certain what they were doing. This caused a bit of envy in her. The Kales were married before they met, but ever since the events that forced them all down to Enga, she could tell they were a loving young couple. She had hoped, after meeting them at first, that she would be able to find someone, but that had been destroyed by Mantarok. The evil ancient even managed to take away their chances at a normal life, but the Kales tried to keep some aspects of normal life. While she did admire that, she had also accidentally walked in on them, and it was embarrassing for all of them. Now that she was approaching with others, she had to warn them. Without pausing, she shouted, "Richard, Yvette, we need to talk. We may have an idea on stopping Mantarok." She didn't know if they heard her or not, but if they caught those words, they would hopefully be ready to meet them. As they neared, she looked at Percival Marsh and calmly said, "This is the general living area. Everyone has room, and those rooms appear to be furnished for those living there. Some of the things are transported here by the magic of the goddess. The only downside is none of these rooms have doors. Usually, the sleeping areas are furthest from these doors." She noticed the professor nodded in understanding. "That seems understandable. I also take it that the Kales are the only married couple down here." She nodded, and a look of understanding crossed his face as they neared the place the Kales resided in. She wondered if he realized why she called out the warning that they were coming. Just as they reached the door, she saw Richard and Yvette coming out to meet them. If anyone didn't know any better, they would have thought nothing was out of the ordinary. But Alexandra knew them better. While they all did what they could to look well-groomed, Alexandra noticed small details that told her that her friends were having one of their rare moments alone. The only obvious sign that they had hastily dressed was the fact that Yvette's shirt, while it fit her when she was younger, now was worn as a crop top, and the knot was not completely tied. It was Richard who spoke first. "Alex, your timing is impeccable." For a moment she blushed, but she quickly regained her senses. She was thankful, however, when Michael spoke. The Canadian-born firefighter had always shown a no-nonsense attitude when it came to the ancients. "Professor Marsh had been telling us about a book that has a clue on how to defeat Mantarok. He started telling us about it after Yvette pulled you out of there." At that moment, she saw both Yvette and Richard blush. However, Michael either didn't notice it or just stayed in an almost military mindset. "The only problem is the book is hidden in his office." In that moment, the couple had stopped blushing and were focused on the topic. Yvette was the first to speak the obvious complication. "And no doubt the office is being searched by the police. If this book is well hidden, then we'll have a shot at recovering it." She then saw the redhead shudder. "It still sends chills through me that bone thieves
have gotten everywhere. If one of them finds the book, all might be lost.
This time it was Professor Marsh who spoke, and his words put them all at ease. Not this hiding spot. It's a bit tricky to open. However, they might be able to find it if they use some other means. Hopefully, we can get to it before then. Alexandra took over from there. She had been thinking this out the whole time they were walking over.
We can do it, but it will have to be a two-person team. And when security is at its lowest. That will most likely be this evening. I've even thought about who that team should be, and it will be Yvette and Michael.
She was stunned when a shocked look crossed Richard's face. She didn't think he would take the news badly. Wait a second. I know Yvette can handle herself. But we are only now seeing how Mantarok's minions are. Isn't there another choice? And why not have me go up to claim it?
She looked him in the eye and calmly said, Simple. Out of all of us here, who are prepared to handle these things, Yvette and Michael are not high on any watch list. You ran into a bone thief coming back, and I'm wanted for murder. Our new arrivals can't go for similar reasons. That leaves Yvette and Michael. You may not like it, but it is the only option. She waited a second, since she was certain he was trying to figure out any way for someone else to go. Honestly, if she was in his shoes, she would be thinking the same thing. Michael Edwards could understand why Richard was on edge. He had seen Yvette go through the same worries when Richard ventured out of the underground city, usually on less risky missions. With this one, the odds of an encounter were high. They were going to sneak into a public building, into a place guarded by police, and then sneak out. In all honesty, if it went smoothly, he was sure something was wrong. Finally, before Richard could voice another objection, which he was sure Richard was trying to figure out, he spoke. Listen, Richard, we are already ready to do the infiltration. On one of my trips, I managed to get uniforms for police officers. One male, one female. It's the only way this can work, and it may lead to the defeat of Mantarok. Plus, if it makes you feel any better, I will keep a close eye on her, and keep her from trouble. He watched as Richard relaxed a bit. If one didn't know Richard by now, they would think he wasn't worried at all now. But Michael had known better. It wasn't until Yvette put her hand on Richard's shoulder and said, Don't worry, hon. I'll be fine. Besides, even if there is trouble, I'm sure it's nothing we can't handle. Besides, I'm sure we'll be armed, just in case one of Mantarok's minions show up. He then looked at Professor Marsh, who just nodded and knew just why they had turned to face him. The man pulled out a tablet and pen and started sketching the office they were going to search. The hiding spot of the book is hidden in one of the shelves. You may need to remove the books from that shelf, and then open a hidden panel in the shelf. Once you do that, you'll find the old book. He nodded, thinking was a bit too simple, but thought better than to say that. If anything would make a mission go wrong, it was a statement like that. He looked at Yvette, and they started heading out of the living area. As they walked, he just said to her, I have the uniforms up in the mansion. We'll have to get them on right away and head right out. We'll cast a temporary invisibility spell so we can make it there unnoticed. He watched as she started to walk faster. Good idea. Where exactly are those outfits? He knew why she was asking that. He figured she wanted to get in costume before he did. There was only one person who she would change in front of, and that was her husband. As they neared the way up to the mansion, he just said, I have the costumes in the master bedroom. You head up first, and I'll be there in a few. He watched as she then ran towards the long stairwell. If they had not been able to extend the protection to the mansion, he would have been worried. However, the illusion was still enough to keep the curious away, and the barrier kept any of Mantarok's minions from entering the building. He waited for a few moments, wanting to give Yvette some time to reach the building and get changed. He needed a few moments' quiet. It was a habit he had gotten into during the war, and it came in helpful a lot now. It allowed him a few moments to build up his sanity. He knew that was not a problem for Yvette, since she saw things for what they were. It was another reason why Yvette was the best choice for this mission. He then started to head up to the mansion, when he was approached by one of the new arrivals, James Mulroy. Just from their first meeting, he knew the young man was a favorite student of Professor Marsh. Just from the way the young man carried himself, he had a feeling about what was coming. However, he decided to ask the obvious question. Is there something you wanted, James? He was not surprised when the young man nodded. Yes, sir. I wanted to help in this task. I've been in Professor Marsh's office a few times. I can help you find the hiding spot and help you get by campus security. Michael just looked at the man, hoping the man wouldn't need to be told why his help would be a bad idea. After a few moments, the young man didn't move. Michael sighed and put a hand on James' shoulder. I'm sorry. While the offer to help is appreciated, I have to turn it down. You do remember that they are looking for you. He saw the man was about to protest, but he held up his hands. Listen, I know you didn't do anything, but you must be someone whom Mantarok and his followers perceive as a threat. With them recently naming you as linked to a killer, you are high on the alert list. So far, I'm not on any list, and Yvette is low on the priority list. That will make it easy for both of us to get in. He was surprised when the young man sighed. I'm not happy about it, but I understand. Let me give you some advice. The building Professor Marsh's office is in is connected to the drama department's building. Maybe that can be useful to you, just in case. Michael nodded, and then watched as the new arrival walked away. He didn't feel good about it, but it was for the best. They needed this mission to succeed. He then headed up to the mansion to prepare for the mission. Bishop Philippe sighed as he walked through the underground city of Enga. He was sticking to the areas that Dr. Lindsay had pointed out, but his mind was still trying to wrap its way around all he had to take in. It was still hard to believe that not too long ago the Pope himself had revealed one thing, and now he had so much more dropped on him. It would take time to process all this information, especially that his faith had been corrupted. Before he would have sworn it was nothing but blasphemy. But now he really started to think about it. The church itself was not without sin. Even he questioned why the Inquisition had happened. While he saw the point in saving heretics from being punished by God, it could not be right to torture them into belief. He sighed and took another look around. As the archaeologist had told him, the city looked to be ancient, yet it still looked like it was new. It was a wonder, but Edwin had said that was because of the goddess. It was also thanks to the goddess that they understood one another, even though he was speaking French. It was another one of the things he had to wrap his head around. Thinking about all of these things, he was almost surprised when someone spoke to him. "Bishop?" He turned to see who had spoken to him, only to find the one young lady who had arrived with the others. He had noticed it before, but he didn't want to comment on her outfit, which seemed to suggest she had been planning to sin. He politely nodded. "Yes, my child. How can I help you?" He was ready to still live up to the duties the priesthood demanded of him, even in what had to be very dark times. He was surprised when the young lady just looked at him and said, "You said you were restoring Ublé Cathedral." He nodded, remembering that she said her great-grandfather had been there many years ago. "I was just wondering what you knew about it. Growing up, before my great-grandfather passed, he had told me about stories, about how under the cathedral there was altars to those ancient things. He even said how the place had been haunted by other creatures, but he had defeated them. I was wondering if it was true. Even though he had said he had defeated them, he always insisted that it was only a delay." He nodded and sighed. He had not really expected this, but he was also aware of the sordid past of Ublé. He had heard it growing up and during his time in the church. "I wish I could say it was pleasant, my child, but it was not. Ublé had been under a shadow for many centuries. I had heard of the young Savior growing up, and was told of how he had saved the cathedral from a true devil. However, the rumors of demons still persisted. The old tower remained sealed up. It was said that the old tower held many dark things, and that it was only sealed off by a priest." He sighed again. At least it had been sealed off by a priest. "I somehow recall that the tower had been open when I was a child, but I kept thinking of the story of the young man who defeated the evil, and the other man that had helped him." He recalled the way the second man had been described, and realized the image was similar to Richard Cale. He watched as the young girl, Marlene, as he recalled from the introductions, nodded. "Yes, my great-grandfather spoke of that to his dying day. He remembers how shocked he was at finding the altar rooms, one where he said some sacrifices had been made. At the time, he even thought the cathedral had been built off the old temple." He wanted to protest after hearing that, but she continued. "However, if corruption had already been there, it could have been built when the church was built." While it didn't sound much better given recent revelations, it was plausible. "What I do know is that my great-grandfather often said that some of these hard things knew how to hide and how to corrupt. The field hospital that was there turned into a killing ground. Soldiers were being used to feed some monstrosity that he killed. He even described that the one altar which was over a chasm, still seemed to see use. Bishop Philippe gasped when he heard that. He was certain he didn't see that altar, but had heard about it. From all he knew, it had been destroyed. But if she was correct, and given what had happened, could that altar still be in use? And if so, it gave light to some of the disappearances that happened in Amiens. For a moment he forgot himself and spoke out loud. Mon Dieu, how these pagans have soiled your house. At that moment he was stunned when another voice said, Maybe you shouldn't not say that word. It makes you sound like they all work together. He glanced in the direction of the voice, and was surprised to see the Wiccan Amber Snow approaching. However, after his momentary lapse, he noticed that she did not seem upset. In fact, she seemed quite calm about it, given everything they had just heard. He then wondered if she had a better grip on things, given her faith, than he had. Amber Snow had been walking around the small area of the underground city that they had been told about when she heard the bishop speaking with someone. At first she was sure he was trying to convert someone to his religion, but then she heard mention of an altar in a way that any religion wouldn't condone. At least any religion in the current era would condone, but those in the past would. It is what had prompted her to make the remark she had. When she had seen the bishop's face, however, she felt a bit sorry for him. It was his strict religious ways that was making it hard for him to accept this. Since her religion did not have a name for evil, that was the only thing making it hard for her to accept this. Learning that the evil might have a name, as she kept telling herself, was the only difficulty. Everything else was easy by comparison. When she had gotten to those talking, she crossed her arms in front of her, in a casual way, and then spoke. While you might not believe this at first, Wicca does not practice human sacrifice. In fact, I think all structured religions around today frown on that. Wiccans practice a oneness with nature. I think it was that misconception that caused many Catholics to view us as heretics. She watched as the bishop blinked and then nodded. While he said nothing more, it was the young lady, Marlene, as she recalled, that spoke. I think you're right. My great-grandfather had said it was the altar for an ancient deity, but he could never recall the name. It was as if the name couldn't remain the same. For a brief moment Amber felt a chill go through her. She had heard stories from others of her faith, of tainted areas, where some old name is whispered through the air. Those that had been in those areas always mentioned some names she didn't want to admit knowing. The names were evil names, and evil should not be named. She inwardly calmed herself down and then spoke. What you speak of, that altar, had been encountered by other Wiccans, but we quickly leave those areas. We can sense the evil there, and we avoid it. I will not lie that there are some that would embrace it, but given our beliefs, it is folly to do so. However, they also don't give that evil force a name. To do so is to give it a terrible strength. We also know that the evil is an ancient one. In that instant she heard an ethereal voice say, Your beliefs are mostly right, Amber. Your religion has been the only one to remain pure, untainted by all of the ancients. Most of the ancients do not care at all about the people of this world, and would do all they could to remove them. Some are impassive, but the ones I have fought to contain and defeat control people for their own amusement. However, not naming evil is just as dangerous as naming it. To be afraid of a name gives that being just as much power as not naming it. Without the other ancients around anymore, Mantrak will keep trying to insert himself into your religion. She heard Bishop Philippe gasp, and then say, "Why would this thing do that?" She wanted to know that too, but was still afraid to say the name. She was horrified when the voice answered. Months ago, Mantrak completed a plan to use humans to destroy the three ancients that had been imprisoned in your world's space. Many eons ago, Mantrak and I had corralled three of the worst ancients, who always battled, and those battles destroyed many civilizations, not just here. Mantrak and I were not allies, but we knew that these battles would destroy all. What I had been unaware of was that Mantrak's reasons were selfish, and that he plotted to have some humans kill the ancients. Now Mantrak wants this world, and he is escalating his actions. If we do not stop him soon, his followers will overtake this planet. Mankind will die out. There had been an audible gasp come from everyone as the last words echoed in her mind. She then heard Marlene ask the question that had been bothering her as well. Wait, isn't that what the others had wanted? To destroy mankind? Why didn't Mantrak team up with them? She was not surprised when Philippe answered the question. Maybe it is because that evil usually does not trust anyone, especially those who shares its interests. No doubt these other ancients were easily imprisoned because they warred with one another. And if Mantrak is stepping up his own plans, that means that he feels there is no opposition, or he must do it. Amber was surprised when she finished the thought the bishop had started, because opposition that shows up now could be devastating. The goddess spoke to each of us, or made sure we could get here for some reason. We must be able to stop. She paused for a moment, and then made herself say the name. Mantrak! We just don't know how yet, but we can stop him. In that moment she heard another gasp. She glanced in its direction, and was surprised to see Marlene running off. She wondered why the girl decided to run off, but Philippe answered her unspoken question. She has just seen the boy she had arrived with, speaking with someone. She had rushed off, possibly moved by the way that goddess spoke. She noticed that he didn't seem to have much difficulty saying that, making her wonder if it was because of his beliefs to begin with. After a moment, she was stunned when he just extended a hand and said, I apologize for earlier. I was still in shock for what had happened to the Pope and all this strangeness. It is not a good excuse, but it is an honest answer. I should rethink my views with all this happening. For a moment she wondered if she should accept the handshake, but then she remembered that they were in this together. The only right thing to do was accept the apology. Lucinda Tepes left the elevator
now back in her business suit with Robert. She was happy that her meeting with her master Mantarok had gone so well. She had suspected so much, even during the time when the Roman centurion was doing what he thought was for one of the other ancients. She just couldn't find any reference to a weapon to defeat her lord. Now Robert would be able to stop them before they found the location of its hiding spot. She still wished she could get it, but Mantarok had his reasons. She was brought out of those thoughts when the receptionist came over. All she knew for certain was that the girl was a part-time worker who went to Howard Phillips University. She also had to be new to the company, since all the other receptionists knew that when she was in the temple, she was not to be disturbed. Of course, most of them believed she was in an important business meeting. All of them were unworthy of following Mantarok, and if they suspected, that had to be dealt with immediately. However, this moment required staying calm. "Is there a problem?" She paused to glance at the woman's name tag. "Roberta." The woman looked at her nervously, and then glanced back at the receptionist desk. And Lucinda saw the officer there. For a moment she was concerned, since not all the policemen in the city had been taken over by bone thieves. Some were still human, and had to be handled differently. It was made worse when the receptionist just said, "He arrived not too long ago, and said he had a few more questions for you. I had just arrived, and I had been told you were not to be disturbed. I tried to ask him to come back later, but he wouldn't leave." She then looked around for a second and softly said, "I'm also worried there may be a problem. I've been hearing a strange hiss lately, like there is gas leaking in. I keep hearing this odd hiss everywhere." Lucinda did not react to the statement, but studied the receptionist for a moment. She would have to be dealt with, and very soon. She then looked at the officer, and heard the telltale hiss of a bone thief. She looked at the officer and said, "You wanted to speak with me, officer?" She discreetly held up her hand and waited until the receptionist was back at her desk. Once the girl was seated, she softly said, "Well, what have you found out?" She watched as the officer looked around for a moment, and then looked at her. He removed his shades, revealing his scarred eyes. "The initial search revealed nothing. However, the investigation is being led by a human. He is holding off on a full search since he is trying to verify if the search is needed." She waited for a moment, hoping the creature had some other news to tell her. After a moment she frowned and said, "I see. You will need to recruit more, and maybe make sure that the one in charge corrects his error. We need to find what is there, even if it is protected by Mantrak's ancient foe. It could lead to them finding the item to defeat him." After a moment she took a deep breath, still upset about how things had played out. She did not need failures to happen now. Her company was now a worldwide force, since it had brought up all the proxy companies set up by Paul Augustine, which would allow worldwide access for Mantarok's minions to destroy the unworthy humans. Now, with that small group running about, she needed to make sure no one could stop her. Lord, They had to exterminate all those sensitive to the veil, since they could oppose Mantarok. With that last thought, she looked over at the receptionist. She was attractive, and no doubt could go anywhere on the campus. She was also sensitive to the veil, since she could hear the bone thieves. The young girl had to go, and maybe she was the answer to the problem. If they couldn't get to the police officer before night, then the only solution was to replace the lady and send her in. She smiled at the thought of what she was going to do and motioned for the girl to come over to them. Robert watched for a moment as Lucinda beckoned the receptionist over, a little unsure of why she was doing that. After a moment, the reason came to him. As the confused girl started to walk over, he whispered, "I take it you want me to possess her." She discreetly nodded, and he waited at her side. When the girl had reached them, he could see she was nervous and afraid. He loved fear. It made it easier to possess them. When they were scared, it was easier to shred their souls. However, he remained quiet, knowing this was best. The girl looked at him, then at Lucinda. "Is there something I can help you with?" He almost smirked when Lucinda smiled, what had to be a sweet smile at the girl. "In a way. Robert was a bit concerned about those hisses you are hearing, and what you to guide him around, pointing out the sources. I'm sure you'd agree that we don't want gas leaks here." He could see the girl nod briefly, and he was sure it was because of rumors. He made sure he had rumors going around of how malevolent he was. He glanced around, and then noticed the one room nearby. It was empty. He could easily do what he had to do in there, even though part of him wanted to do it in front of everyone. He motioned to her and said, keeping the hiss out of his voice, "We'll start in here." He watched her enter, noticing every curve in her body. He was sure he would enjoy everything about that body once he shed this one for hers. Robert enjoyed possessing the female body, since it seemed to have more power, especially when it came to controlling males. He then entered the room and closed the door behind him. For a moment all was quiet, and then he let out the hiss. He watched as she looked around for a moment. Finally she spoke. "I do hear it in here. However, I've been in here a few times before to fetch stuff, and never heard it." He wondered if she would catch on before he released the body he was in. It was already dead, and he was sure the reveal would make her scream in pure terror. That was one of the best things about shedding a form. After a moment, he was glad to see she was looking at him. She was still oblivious to what was going to happen. I think it's near you. That's still odd. He shed the body at that moment, causing what remained of the body to splatter all over the room, and some of it hit the girl. He then locked eyes with her, letting her fragile mind absorb the creature he was. He knew she was taking in his odd horn skull,
his thin body and his blade-like arms. He was not disappointed when she screamed. It was a primordial scream, one that came from as far back as when humans had just started walking on two legs. It was also a scream that, if it went on too long, would draw people to it. He quickly pounced, expertly landing on her shoulders and gouging his blades into her eyes. Humans didn't know how true it was that the eyes were the window to the soul, and as his blades made contact, he shredded her soul. Whenever a bone thief shredded the soul of their next host, they learned a lot about them. He learned that while this girl dressed proper, she longed to, as humans would say, let her hair down. There were other secrets, like feelings she had for a boy. He would use all this, taking all the information in as he got used to the body. He would, no, she would use all this. She then left the room and looked straight at Lucinda. Roberta, as she was now known, smiled. "It's done. I've taken over her body. Mind you, I'll need to clean up first before I do anything." She watched as Lucinda nodded. "Then you'd better leave now. Once you clean up, you'll need to observe the professor's office. Whatever is hidden in there, there is no doubt that someone will come to get it. I don't think it will be Professor Marsh, but it might be Alexandra Roivas, or one of the Kales that comes for it." Roberta nodded in understanding, but then smiled a wicked smile. "Shall I kill them, or have the Guardian kill them?" She could just see the ways she could use this form to detain and then kill Mantroc's enemies. She watched as Lucinda thought for a moment, and then said, "All but one. We will need one, maybe to lure the others into the open, or even to learn their plans. Make your call when you see who arrives. However, you can be certain that whomever it will be, it is one that isn't going to draw a lot of attention." For a moment she thought about it, and then remembered which two were low on the watch lists. She nodded, and then left, hearing the Guardian behind her, in the floating ball of light form they all took for traveling. The time to strike would be upon them soon. Vet Kale carefully searched for the hiding spot in Professor Marsh's office with Michael Edwards. They had lucked out when they arrived at the building. The only thing barring their way into the office had been some police tape. The office didn't even appear to be searched at all. However, they remained clear of the windows and door, which was not easy. The office, with all the items in it, did not allow them many ways to be out of sight. Also, once the sun finally set, they could not risk turning on lights. It would be advertising they were there. It was also why they had remained quiet since they got there. They had barely fooled a few campus security people, and they didn't want to chance another encounter. At least most of the students had thought they were campus security. This time, however, they needed to speak. "Michael, any sign of the hidden spot yet?" She felt disappointed when he responded, "Nope. We need to find it soon, though. I don't think we want to run back as late night falls. I've got a feeling that more creatures are out at night anymore." She nodded, and then froze as she stumbled across the hiding spot. She quickly reached in and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. She quickly opened the book and was not surprised when she saw the contents. In it, in writing that translated itself on the spot, she read about the item to stop Mantarok, where to find it, and where it had to be used. "Michael," she excitedly said, "I found it. It says what we need to find and where it has to be done." As she looked at the book, she heard him come over to her. "That's good, but why do I have the feeling it isn't going to be that simple?" She looked over the pages and realized he was right. It wasn't going to be that simple. It was going to be very complicated. From what she could see, it seemed that so the betrayal couldn't be discovered, various precautions were made to make the item very difficult to find. She put the book into a case they had brought with them, with hopes anyone who saw it would think it was a case to carry crime scene evidence. "You're right. It isn't going to be simple. The clues to the item are hidden in various locations, like a scavenger hunt. It's amazing they seem so far apart, but after seeing the latest discovery in Enga, I'm not so surprised." She watched as he nodded and then glanced out the door. "Coast looks clear. We should be able to make it out of here, and off the floor." She nodded and made sure her hat was on. It was sad to say that it was the only part of the costume that fit. She had found that out trying to fasten all the buttons, and right now certain ones were ready to go flying. They left the office and started down towards the stairs out. Neither of them had an idea of any alternate routes, so if something went wrong, they would need to think very quickly. Otherwise, they would be in trouble. The fact worried Yvette, recalling some of the methods that the Lesser Guardians used to move. If that were to happen, they would need to run fast, since the method would allow the creatures to pass through the walls. She was almost lost on those concerns when she noticed a college student entering the floor they were on. Almost the second she saw her, something told Yvette that something was wrong. She noticed Michael had slowed down, and he could tell something was wrong too. He softly said, "Something doesn't seem right. Be ready to head down this hall just in case." She nodded, since she was carrying the case with the book. She stayed back, glad that the brims on their hats kept part of their faces hidden. Michael also had the commanding tone, since he had been in the military. Since it was a student, she was certain that would be enough to make the girl leave. "Miss, there's an investigation going on here, and I advise you to leave. Official police business." She waited for a moment, discreetly looking at the hallway. Something in her told her that she may have to run in a moment. She also noticed that the girl wasn't moving. She was standing her ground. She also noticed something else in her stance. The stance didn't seem right for a college student. Something in that stance hinted at a confidence that comes with years of age. It also seemed like her body seemed alien to her. All of a sudden, she knew what she was looking at. It was then confirmed when the girl spoke with a hiss in her voice. "Honestly, I know you aren't police, Mr. Edwards. Now give me the book, and maybe Lord Mantarok won't kill you yet." She was possessed by a bone thief. She recalled what her husband had said about his earlier encounter with one, and realized how bad this was. In an instant she saw Michael pull out a handgun which he had hidden, and heard him say to her, "Go!" She turned down the hallway and ran, not sure where to go. As she ran, she heard him yell, "It is only one of you, and I'll shoot you before you can even leap at me. You won't get the book." She ran to the end of the hall, and almost froze as an orb of purple light passed her. She knew what it was, and was almost horrified when it materialized. It was a shapeless blob with tentacles everywhere. Several of them grabbed Michael before he could turn to shoot, and some were heading for her. She turned and ran towards another door, one that looked a little out of place. As she ran, she heard the bone thief start to run down the other hall, the one near the steps. It was shouting orders. "Kill him and nab the girl. She was what She has what we need. You must keep her alive. Lucinda once averred with her." She swallowed hard, and almost screamed when a tentacle grabbed her arm. As it did that, she heard a horrid ripping sound, and a scream from Michael. She knew what had happened. She didn't take time to mourn, though, as the tentacle around her arm tried to tighten. In a swift moment, she ripped her costume open and spun out at the top. She then ran through the door she had seen with the case. The door led to a hall into another building, and quickly got out of sight of the door. She heard a loud scream, which only told her that the bone thief knew she had gotten away. However, she wasn't sure for how long. She could only hope it would take them a while to realize where she had gone, but now her dilemma was how she could get back home. If she left the building like she was now, she could be facing charges. She was lucky she only lost her top, and that she had something on under it. But that wasn't enough to avoid a charge of indecency. She was in a dilemma, unless she could find a more covert way. She made her way down the hall of where she was now, and stopped long enough to look back. While the door she had come through was closed, it had a faint purple glow in it, and she knew she was in trouble. She was scared now, but she held enough strength to keep herself from screaming. This had been good, since at that moment she felt someone grab her from behind and pull her into a door. She didn't know who had grabbed her, but for some reason she was certain it wasn't worse than what was coming for her.